The sky had been calm at first, a pale orange stretching across the horizon of the jagged mountains. Kalira adjusted the controls of her small spacecraft, feeling a small thrill. She was used to long flights between star systems, but nothing had prepared her for the turbulence that hit just minutes later. A violent jolt shook the cabin. Warning lights blinked red, and the spacecraft lurched dangerously. Kalira's heart raced as she gripped the controls. "Not now. Please, not now," she whispered to herself. Beside her, Lumo, her small child, clutched a soft blanket, his large eyes wide with fear. Kalira forced herself to stay calm. She had trained for emergencies like this, but the mountain range below looked uncharted, unfamiliar, and dangerous. The alarms screamed louder, echoing through the cabin. Kalira fought the failing engines, trying to steer the ship toward a flat area she thought might serve as a landing zone. But the mountains were unforgiving. A strong gust pushed the ship sideways. Rocks loomed like jagged teeth. "Brace yourself." "Lumo!" Kalira shouted. The spacecraft crashed violently into a narrow valley. Metal screeched and twisted. Dust and smoke filled the cabin. Kalira's ears rang, and for a moment, she feared she might not have survived. The ship slid a few feet before grinding to a stop against a rocky slope. When the smoke cleared, Kalira opened her eyes. Pain throbbed in her arms and legs, but she could move. Lumo was next to her, coughing but alive. Relief washed over her, mixed with dread. They were stranded, and the supplies that were supposed to sustain them had been crushed in the crash. Kalira carefully unbuckled herself and checked Lumo. "You're okay, little one," she said, forcing a smile. Lumo nodded weakly, but his face showed exhaustion. The surrounding landscape was harsh. The mountain peaks were sharp and snow covered the higher slopes. The valley was narrow, surrounded by cliffs. Winds blew cold, sharp air that stung the skin. Kalira realized immediately that they needed shelter. Fast. Spotting a dark opening in a cliffside, she grabbed Lumo and ran the short distance to the cave. Inside, it was cold, but at least it blocked the wind. She laid Lumo down on the smooth floor, covering him with her blanket. "We'll be safe here for a while," she whispered. Kalira looked at the wreckage outside. Their supplies, food, water, emergency rations, were smashed. Her stomach sank. The cave might protect them from the wind, but it would not provide warmth or sustenance. She forced herself to think clearly. Lumo needed her, and she had to stay strong. First, she checked her own injuries. A few bruises, a sprained wrist. Nothing life-threatening. Lumo had a small cut on his forehead, but otherwise seemed okay. "We'll survive this," Kalira said, more to convince herself than Lumo. The first night in the cave was the hardest. The wind howled outside, rattling rocks and echoing through the narrow passage. Lumo shivered, and Kalira held him close. She whispered stories of their home planet, tales of forests that glowed in the night and skies painted with colors humans couldn't imagine. She hoped the stories would comfort him and perhaps herself as well. By dawn, the cold had seeped into their bones. Kalira knew they couldn't stay in the cave without food for long. Lumo's energy was low, and she had no idea what could be eaten in this alien environment. She decided to explore, hoping to find water or some edible plants. The cave's mouth opened onto a narrow ledge. Kalira climbed carefully, testing the terrain. The mountain was treacherous, rocks loose under her feet. Lumo clung to her shoulder, trusting her completely. Hours passed. Kalira found a small stream trickling down from the upper rocks. The water looked clean, but she had no way of knowing if it was safe for their alien bodies. Carefully, she tested a drop on her tongue. It was bitter but not harmful. She gave Lumo a few sips. He drank eagerly, and Kalira felt a spark of hope. They had no food. Kalira examined the nearby plants. Some were strange, glowing faintly in the morning light. Others had sharp leaves or thorns. She realized quickly that most were not safe. Lumo's stomach rumbled, and Kalira felt a pang of guilt. She had to find something before he became too weak. Time blurred. Days passed, though Kalira lost count. Each day was a careful search for water, each night a fight to stay warm. The snowstorms came unexpectedly, forcing them to retreat deeper into the cave. Lumo's energy began to drop, and Kalira felt panic rising. "I need food, little one," she murmured, touching his tiny shoulder. Lumo looked at her with trust and fear. "I will find something, I promise." Kalira's mind raced. Their home planet had technology, nutrition packs, rations. Here she had nothing. She examined the alien plants again, trying to remember which ones could be safe. She took tiny bites, testing her body's reaction before giving anything to Lumo. At night, Kalira stayed awake, listening to the wind and the strange sounds of the mountains. Sometimes it sounded like distant creatures calling, or maybe the rocks themselves shifting. Lumo slept fitfully beside her. Kalira's thoughts drifted to the possibility of never being found, of being lost in this unforgiving place forever. One evening, a sudden noise startled them. A rock slide echoed from above the cave entrance, sending pebbles skittering across the floor. Lumo cried out. Kalira hugged him tightly. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're safe here. We're okay." But deep inside, Kalira knew they weren't entirely safe. The mountains were alive with dangers, predators, falling rocks, and the cruel elements. Survival meant constant vigilance, and she was already exhausted. The next morning, Kalira noticed something strange. Footprints in the snow, human-like, with boots she had never seen on her planet. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be another traveler, a rescue, or was it a predator disguised in a human-like shape? She watched from a distance, hiding behind a rocky outcrop. The footprints moved closer, leaving clear marks in the fresh snow. Her mind raced. Lumo needed help, and if this was a human, maybe he could help. But Kalira had never trusted another species completely. She made a decision. Tomorrow she would try to make contact. For now she would observe and hope. Lumo needed food and warmth more than anything else. Kalira held him close, whispering softly to calm his fears. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the valley. Kalira felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her chest. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for Lumo. She had to protect him from the mountains, from hunger, from despair. As the first part of the day ended, Kalira made a silent promise. No matter what came, she would find a way. She would find a way to keep Lumo alive, to keep hope alive, and perhaps to reach the strange human whose footprints now marked the snow. For the first time since the crash, Kalira allowed herself a small spark of hope. The mountains were harsh, but they were not the end. Survival was possible, and as long as she had Lumo by her side, she would not give up. The morning air was crisp, but not kind. Kalira's breath formed small clouds as she peeked out from the cave. Snow covered the valley like a soft blanket, hiding dangers beneath its icy surface. She glanced at Lumo, who was still curled up, under the blanket, weak but awake. His small hands trembled as he tried to stretch. Kalira's heart ached. He needed nourishment, but the cave offered nothing beyond cold stones and stale air. She had tried small bites of strange plants the day before, but Lumo's tiny stomach could tolerate very little. Hunger gnawed at him relentlessly, and she had no way to make it better. "Stay here, little one," Kalira whispered. "I will find something." The snow crunched under her feet as she climbed higher along the mountainside. The landscape was harsh, sharp rocks jutting up like broken teeth. The wind bit through her clothes, but Kalira pushed forward. Each step required effort and focus. A single slip could mean disaster. Hours passed. Kalira searched every crevice, examined every plant. Most were poisonous, some bitter and alien in ways that made her stomach turn. She had learned to recognize the dangerous ones, but finding something edible was almost impossible. Lumo's hungry cries echoed in her mind with every failed attempt. Eventually, Kalira spotted a small cluster of luminescent moss growing near. a rock face. Its glow was faint, but she remembered reading that similar plants were safe for consumption on her planet. With cautious hope, she picked some and carried it back to the cave. Lumo's eyes brightened at the sight of her returning. "Food?" he asked in a small, weak voice. "Yes," Kalira said, kneeling beside him. She crushed the moss into small pieces, letting him nibble. Lumo's face lit up as he ate, though the food was barely enough to fill his stomach. Kalira waited, tense for any sign of reaction. When Lumo did not cry out or gag, relief washed over her. "You're safe," she whispered. "We'll survive this." But even as she spoke, Kalira knew the moss was not enough. Days, maybe weeks, could pass before they found proper nutrition. And the weather showed no mercy. Snowstorms swept across the peaks unpredictably, forcing them to huddle inside the cave for hours at a time. Each storm brought colder winds and heavier snow. The nights were worse. Lumo shivered beneath his blanket, and Kalira wrapped herself around him, trying to share her warmth. She whispered stories of home, of lush forests and glowing oceans, hoping to distract him from the cold and hunger. But sleep came fitfully. Every creak of the rocks outside or sudden gust of wind made her heart leap. Kalira had always been resourceful, but this environment tested her in ways she had never imagined. She used bits of wreckage from the spacecraft to make rudimentary tools, trying to crack open hard seeds or dig through the snow for edible roots. Each small success brought hope, each failure frustration. One afternoon, while exploring a narrow ledge above the cave, she noticed movement in the distance. A shadow shifted across the snow, small and light. At first, she thought it was a mountain creature, perhaps a predator looking for food. She crouched low, shielding Lumo with her body as she watched carefully. But then she realized the movement was different. It was deliberate. Footprints formed in the fresh snow, boots unlike any she had seen on her planet. Kalira's heart leapt. Could it be a human? A traveler from another world? Perhaps here to rescue them? Or someone dangerous? She could not tell. That night she stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the wind and imagining possibilities. Lumo rested beside her, tired but calmer now, after the moss meal. Kalira's mind raced with questions. Humans were unpredictable. Some might help, others might harm. She had no choice but to wait and observe. The next morning, Kalira gathered courage. She ventured closer to the edge of the cave, hiding behind rocks to watch the footprints. The person who made them had left only a short trail before disappearing from sight. Kalira decided she needed to test the situation carefully. She took some moss and left it outside the cave, hoping the human might return and see it as a sign of trust. She retreated quickly into the shadows, watching from a distance. Hours passed. The wind howled. Lumo grew restless, and Kalira wondered if they had made a mistake. Late in the afternoon, a figure appeared on the ridge. A human, dressed in thick, winter clothing, cautiously approached the cave. Kalira's heart raced. The human moved carefully, almost as if he knew danger could be anywhere. He stopped near the moss she had left, studied it, and then, without touching it, looked around. Kalira felt a flicker of hope. The human had not taken the food immediately. Perhaps he was cautious, or perhaps he meant no harm. She watched, as he began moving away, but not before leaving a small bundle of supplies on the snow, some food and water. Lumo's eyes widened as he saw the bundle. Kalira ran to retrieve it, pulling him inside the cave. They ate in silence, the warmth of the small meal filling them with relief. For the first time in days, they felt a small sense of safety, but Kalira knew it was temporary. They could not survive on small gifts alone. The human might not return, and storms could sweep in at any moment. She needed a plan. The following days were a test of endurance. Kalira explored the area cautiously, marking safe paths and looking for more edible plants. Each time she returned, she found new supplies left by the human, a small gesture that built trust without a single word being exchanged. Lumo grew stronger, but still fragile. Kalira also began noticing the human watching from a distance, always careful not to startle them. His presence was reassuring, even if Kalira did not fully understand him. She observed how he moved through the mountains, how he climbed carefully and respected the terrain. There was something human in his careful kindness, a determination that reminded her of her own resilience. One morning, Kalira decided to venture further than before. She wanted to find a better source of water and possibly more food. Lumo, though weak, insisted on coming with her. "I can help," he said, bravely. Kalira smiled and let him walk beside her, holding his small hand tightly. The journey was treacherous. Loose rocks threatened to give way beneath their feet. Cold wind whipped their faces. But together they moved carefully, supporting each other with every step. Lumo pointed out small edible mosses he found, and Kalira carefully checked each one. Some were safe, others bitter or toxic. By midday, Kalira had found a larger patch of moss and a shallow pool of fresh water. It was enough to sustain them for several days if rationed carefully. She felt a surge of relief. They could survive longer. They were not yet out of danger, but hope glimmered in the harsh landscape. As they returned to the cave, Kalira noticed a shadow on the ledge above. The human. He was observing them from a safe distance. Kalira felt a mix of fear and gratitude. He had not approached too closely, respecting their space, yet he made his presence known. Perhaps he meant to help. Lumo waved shyly, and Kalira felt a warmth in her chest. The bond between the human and them was growing, fragile but real. It was a small sign that even in a harsh world, connection and trust could exist. That night, Kalira sat beside Lumo watching the snow fall outside the cave. The wind howled, the mountains loomed, but she felt a small spark of hope. They had food, water, and perhaps an ally in the human who watched from afar. Survival was still a challenge, but for the first time Kalira believed they might make it. She held Lumo close, whispering stories of glowing forests and gentle rivers, imagining a world beyond the mountains where they could be safe. Sleep finally came light and peaceful, carrying with it the faint promise of rescue. Kalira knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but with determination, careful observation, and the small acts of kindness from the human stranger, she believed they could survive. The mountains were harsh, yes, but hope was stronger, and she would do everything to protect her child. The sun barely peeked over the jagged mountain peaks, spilling pale light across the snow-covered valley. Kalira adjusted her cloak against the wind, carrying Lumo carefully as they stepped out of the cave. The moss she had gathered the day before would last them another day, but her mind was focused on one thing now: the human. For days he had left small supplies, always careful to remain at a distance. Kalira had observed him, studied his movements, and slowly built a cautious trust, but trust alone would not save them. She needed to understand who he was, and whether he could be trusted completely. Lumo clung to her, his small fingers tight around her hand. "Will he help us, Mother?" he asked, his voice small but filled with hope. Kalira smiled softly. "I think so, little one. But we must be careful. Not all humans are the same. We watch and we wait." The human had left supplies near the mouth of the cave the previous evening. Kalira led Lumo to them, keeping herself hidden behind a rock as she scanned the area. The bundle contained water, preserved food, and a small blanket. Lumo's eyes lit up and he eagerly grabbed the blanket, wrapping himself in warmth. Kalira waited until Lumo began eating before she finally stepped out from her hiding place. "We are safe here," she whispered, though only to herself. Hours passed, and the human did not appear. Kalira began to consider a more daring approach. They needed more food and supplies, and perhaps the human could guide them to safety. She had observed his careful, methodical movements before. If she approached slowly and respectfully, he might understand her intentions. Late that afternoon, Kalira stepped carefully onto the snow, holding her hands out in a gesture she hoped would signal peace. Lumo stayed close, trusting her completely. The wind blew harshly, carrying a faint scent of pine and earth. The human froze when he noticed her. His eyes widened, but he did not flee or attack. Instead, he raised a hand slowly, a gesture Kalara had seen in his previous movements. Caution, not aggression. Kalara took a deep breath. "We mean no harm," she said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. "We need help." The human tilted his head, as if considering her words. Then, slowly, he knelt in the snow, placing a small container of water and some preserved food between them. Kalara understood the gesture immediately. He wanted to help, but he also respected caution. Lumo, hungry and curious, stepped forward. "Food?" he asked, his voice tentative. "Yes," Kalara whispered, encouraging him. "Eat." The human watched silently, giving Lumo the space to take the food. Kalara noticed his eyes, a strange mix of curiosity and concern. She realized he was assessing them, much as she had assessed him. Both species were learning to understand one another, without words, relying on gestures, expressions, and actions. After a few moments, Kalara stepped closer. "We are stranded," she said slowly, hoping he could understand. "No food, no shelter outside cave." The human nodded, as if he understood perfectly. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, pointing it toward the cave. A holographic map flickered into view, showing the surrounding mountains. Kalara watched in awe, realizing that he was offering guidance, a way to reach safer ground. She studied the map, noting the paths marked clearly with safer routes and areas to avoid. It was more information than she could have hoped for. Kalara turned to the human, trying to convey her gratitude. She gestured to herself and Lumo, then pointed at the cave and nodded toward the map. The human nodded back, then stepped a little closer, maintaining a careful distance. He seemed to understand her fear, respecting her space. Kalira's heart swelled with cautious hope. Perhaps this human could indeed save them. That night, Kalara and Lumo stayed in the cave, eating the preserved food. Lumo's cheeks were fuller, for the first time in days, and his energy returned slightly. Kalara watched him sleep, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Tomorrow, they would attempt the journey guided by the human. The next morning, Kalara approached the cave entrance and saw the human waiting, supplies in hand. He gestured for them to follow, pointing toward a safer path down the mountain. Kalara nodded, lifting Lumo carefully. The journey would be dangerous, but the human's knowledge made it possible. As they moved through the snow, Kalara noticed how skillful the human was. He tested each step carefully, avoiding loose rocks and hidden crevices. Kalara followed his path, trusting him more with each movement. Lumo stayed close, holding her hand tightly. The path was treacherous, snow-covered. Sharp rocks and occasional small avalanches swept down from higher peaks. Kalara used every ounce of her strength and focus to navigate, while the human silently guided them, placing markers and offering small gestures of reassurance. Hours passed. Kalara was exhausted, but she dared not stop. Lumo's small hands were cold, and his legs tired quickly. Kalara took turns carrying him and resting briefly in small rock shelters. The human shared some of his supplies, giving them both warmth and energy. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a deep valley. Below, Kalara saw a stream flowing between rocks and patches of forest. It was not the safety of a city or base, but it offered resources and a chance to regain strength. Kalara knelt beside Lumo, letting him drink water from the stream. Relief washed over her. "We made it," she whispered. Lumo's small voice echoed her hope. "Yes. Safe." The human remained at a distance, observing but not intruding. Kalara understood his caution. Respecting space, even when trying to help, was a sign of intelligence and empathy. She realized that humans, though different, shared something essential: with her species, the drive to care for others, to protect and save. Night fell, and the three of them set up a temporary shelter with the humans' supplies and some moss collected by Kailera. The stars shone brightly above, unfamiliar constellations mingling with familiar ones from Kailera's home planet. She held Lumo close, whispering stories of home, of glowing forests and shimmering lakes. The human sat nearby, a quiet presence that reassured without words. Kailera realized that trust was growing slowly but surely. They had survived together, and the bond between species was forming through small acts of care and understanding. Days passed as they navigated the mountains. Kailera learned to interpret the humans' gestures and methods. He showed them how to find water, how to test plants for safety, and how to avoid treacherous paths. Lumo grew stronger, his energy returning as he learned to follow instructions and trust the humans' guidance. One afternoon, a sudden blizzard struck. Winds howled and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Kailera clutched Lumo, shielding him from the worst of the storm. The human quickly built a small shelter using portable panels guiding them inside. Kailera marveled at his ingenuity. Human intelligence combined with careful planning was saving their lives. Inside the shelter, warm and protected, Kailera felt a surge of gratitude. She looked at Lumo, who was finally able to rest comfortably. The child smiled weakly, his cheeks flushed with warmth. Kailera's heart swelled with hope. They were surviving, and perhaps even thriving, despite the harsh environment. The blizzard raged through the night, but the shelter held. Kailera realized how remarkable humans were, their ability to think quickly, solve problems, and act with compassion. She whispered softly to Lumo, telling him that their survival was thanks not just to her determination, but to the kindness of a stranger from another world. When the storm passed, they emerged to find the mountains sparkling with fresh snow. The human guided them carefully down the slope, toward the valley they had spotted earlier. The path was easier now, less treacherous, and Kailera felt a cautious optimism. By evening, they reached a lower area where the terrain was gentler. Streams flowed freely and small patches of edible plants grew. Kailera knelt beside Lumo, letting him eat and drink. She felt a deep sense of relief. Finally, they had reached a place where survival seemed possible without constant fear. A human watched from a short distance, offering supplies and gentle gestures. Kailera understood now that this bond, trust, empathy, cooperation, was the key to their survival. She had expected only danger and hardship, but instead she had found a partner in a stranger who embodied the best of humanity. That night, under the stars, Kailera held Lumo close. She whispered stories of home and of hope, imagining a future where they could survive and even thrive. The human slept nearby, a quiet guardian whose presence made the alien mother and child feel safe in a way they had never imagined possible. Kailera knew the journey was far from over. Challenges remained and the mountains were unforgiving. But for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself a small sense of optimism. Together, with courage, determination, and the unexpected kindness of a human, they could overcome the impossible. The early morning sun lit the snow-covered mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. Kailera tightened her cloak against the wind, carrying Lumo as carefully as possible. The small human who had become their unexpected guide, Ethan, was already moving ahead, carefully testing the path. Every step was deliberate, each movement thoughtful, a stark contrast to the chaos of their first crash days ago. Kailera felt a cautious hope. For the first time, she trusted someone completely, and she saw that trust reflected in Lumo's small eyes. The boy held her hand tightly, but he also glanced at Ethan with curiosity and recognition. Survival was no longer just about brute strength or luck. It was about cooperation, and that was something humans excelled at. The path ahead was steep. A jagged ridge separated the valley from a lower plateau where they could find safer shelter and more abundant resources. Kailera assessed the cliffside with a mixture of fear and determination. One slip here could mean disaster. Stay close, Kalira whispered to Lumo. Hold my hand. Ethan, noticing her hesitation, slowed down and turned slightly to gesture. Reassurance. His presence was calming. He had been silently watching over them, ensuring their safety with every cautious movement. Kalira realized she had underestimated humans' ability to plan and adapt under pressure. They climbed carefully, step by step. Loose rocks shifted beneath their feet, threatening to give way. Kalira gritted her teeth and moved slowly, feeling each crevice with the tip of her boot. Lumo stumbled once, but Kalira caught him instantly. Easy, little one, she whispered. We're safe, see? We are careful. Hours passed. Their progress was slow but steady. Snow began to fall lightly, frosting the rocks and hiding the sharp edges that threatened their path. Kalira's muscles ached. Her back protested from carrying Lumo, but she refused to give up. Survival depended on endurance, and her child's life depended on her. Ethan paused periodically, checking for hazards, and offered small supplies, warm food, water, and energy gels that helped Kalira regain strength. Each gesture, though small, was critical. She marveled at the human's ingenuity, how he had prepared for survival in this harsh environment and yet still made room to care for others. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine. A small avalanche had blocked the original path downward. Kalira froze, her heart pounding. There was no easy way around it. Ethan knelt to examine the snow and rocks, gesturing toward a thin passage along the cliffside. It was risky, but it was the only option. Kalira's mind raced. Lumo was small and light, but the ledge was narrow, and one slip could send them tumbling into the icy depths. Kalira inhaled deeply, steeling herself. We can do this, she said softly, both to Lumo and herself. Step by step, careful, always careful. Ethan moved first, demonstrating the safest route. His steady pace, combined with his attention to detail, gave Kalira the confidence she needed. She followed, carrying Lumo close, making sure he felt secure. The passage was treacherous. Snow shifted beneath their feet, and a loose rock sent a small shower of ice and pebbles tumbling into the ravine. Kalira held her breath, moving slowly and deliberately, trusting Ethan's guidance. Each step was a test of patience and courage. Halfway across, Lumo's foot slipped. Kalira caught him instinctively, pressing him against her chest to protect him from the wind and the cold. She whispered words of encouragement, and Lumo clung to her, shivering but unharmed. Ethan, standing nearby, offered his hand. Kalira hesitated, but then realized she could trust him completely. She allowed him to guide them past the most dangerous section, feeling a surge of relief as they reached the other side. The lower plateau stretched out before them, a gentle slope with patches of greenery and small streams flowing between rocks. Kalira's heart lifted. For the first time since the crash, they were in a place where survival seemed not just possible, but likely. She knelt beside Lumo, letting him drink from the stream. His small face lit up as he drank, his strength slowly returning. Kalira felt a warmth she hadn't felt in days, a combination of relief, gratitude, and hope. Ethan watched silently, giving them space, but his gestures made it clear that he was still ready to help if needed. Kalira realized that his actions were more meaningful than words could ever be. Compassion, ingenuity, and patience, all human qualities, had guided them safely down the mountainside. Night fell, and they set up a temporary shelter using supplies Ethan had brought. Kalira wrapped Lumo in a warm blanket, whispering stories of home, of glowing forests and gentle rivers. The child listened with wide eyes, comforted by the presence of both his mother and the human who had become their protector. The storm returned, fiercer than before. Wind tore through the plateau, and snow whipped across their shelter. Kalira felt fear gnawing at her, but she steadied herself. They were prepared this time. Ethan had shown her how to reinforce the shelter, how to secure it against the harsh elements. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside, Kalira held Lumo close, whispering calming words. She could hear Ethan moving outside, checking the structure, ensuring their safety. The child slept peacefully, and Kalira allowed herself a moment of rest. Morning came and the storm had passed. The plateau was covered in fresh snow, sparkling in the early light. Streams flowed freely, and patches of edible plants grew here and there. Kalira allowed herself to smile. They were finally in a place where survival was not a constant fight, but danger had not fully passed. Kalira knew the mountains could still be unpredictable. Avalanches, predators, and treacherous terrain were always a threat. She glanced at Ethan, who had already begun scouting the safest path forward. His determination inspired her. Humans could think quickly, adapt, and act with courage, and these qualities were saving their lives. The next days were filled with careful travel. Kalira learned to follow Ethan's instructions, moving more confidently through the plateau. Lumo's strength returned gradually. He ran small distances, laughing softly, a sound that filled Kalira's heart with joy. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. One evening, as they settled near a small stream, Kalira noticed movement across the valley. A small herd of mountain creatures grazed peacefully, unaware of their presence. She watched with fascination, realizing that even in this harsh environment, life thrived. There was beauty here despite the danger. Ethan gestured to the creatures, pointing out safe paths and warning of potential hazards. Kalira nodded, absorbing every detail. She marveled at his intelligence and careful planning, qualities that had made the difference between life and death. Humans were not just strong, they were capable of incredible problem-solving and compassion. That night, under the stars, Kalira sat beside Lumo. "Do you see, little one?" she whispered. "We are not alone. There is help, even in the harshest places." Lumo nodded, his small hand in hers. "The human helps us," he said softly. "Yes," Kalira said, smiling. "And we trust him." Ethan slept nearby, a quiet guardian whose presence had become familiar and reassuring. Kalira realized that trust, courage, and collaboration, qualities humans possessed in abundance, had carried them this far. Without his guidance, they might still be trapped, in the cave, facing hunger and cold alone. The next morning, Kalira made a silent promise to herself. She would do everything to protect Lumo, yes, but she would also learn from Ethan, observe his methods, and prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they had survived the impossible, but the journey was not yet complete. By mid-morning, they packed their remaining supplies and began the final leg of the descent toward a safer valley. The terrain was gentler, but still required vigilance. Kalira moved confidently now, having learned to navigate the mountains alongside Ethan's careful guidance. Hours later, they reached a wide meadow at the base of the mountains. Streams flowed abundantly, small animals darted between rocks, and edible plants grew in patches. Kalira knelt beside Lumo, letting him explore and eat freely. Relief and gratitude filled her heart. They had survived the mountains thanks to determination, courage, and the kindness of a human who had become their protector. Ethan approached, offering a small pack of food and a warm blanket. Kalira accepted it with a nod, understanding that his support would continue until they were fully safe. She glanced at Lumo, whose laughter rang out across the meadow, and felt a deep sense of hope. The mountains behind them were harsh, unforgiving, and dangerous, but they had overcome them together. Kalira realized that humans, despite being different, shared an essential quality with her species: the drive to protect, to care, and to survive. It was that quality that had saved them, and it was that quality that would guide them into the future. For the first time since the crash, Kalira allowed herself to dream, not just of survival, but of safety, warmth, and a future where she and Lumo could thrive. Ethan's presence was a reminder that even in the darkest moments help could arrive, and that compassion and ingenuity could overcome the harshest challenges. The valley below the mountains stretched wide and green, dotted with streams and small groves of alien-looking plants. For the first time since the crash, Kalira felt a sense of relief that went beyond temporary survival. They were far from the jagged peaks, far from the cave where hunger and cold had once ruled their days, and beside her, Lumo's small hand gripped hers tightly, his energy returning with each passing moment. Ethan, the human who had guided them through the mountains, walked just ahead, his careful steps marking a path of safety. Kalira observed him, noticing how naturally he adapted to the terrain, how he anticipated dangers, and how he always seemed ready to protect them. The bond they had forged during their perilous journey was unspoken but real, a connection built from trust, respect, and mutual survival. "Mother?" Lumo asked suddenly, his small voice breaking the calm. "Will we stay here?" Kalira smiled down at him, brushing a lock of hair from his face. "For now," she said softly. "But soon, we will find a place to rest safely, with food and warmth. This valley is just the first step." Ethan turned slightly and nodded, gesturing toward a gentle slope leading to a cluster of larger trees. Kalira understood immediately. He wanted them to move toward a shelter he had spotted earlier, a place protected from wind, with nearby water and edible plants. The journey to the trees was easier than the mountain climb, yet Kalira remained cautious. Loose stones, hidden holes, and icy patches demanded attention. Lumo ran ahead briefly, testing his strength, then returned to Kalira's side. His laughter was a small, precious sound that warmed her heart. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine life beyond the mountains. By mid-afternoon, they reached the grove. The trees formed a natural barrier against the wind, and a small stream ran through the center, its water clear and cold. Kalira knelt beside Lumo, letting him drink deeply. She felt a surge of hope as his energy seemed fully restored. Ethan carefully unpacked supplies from his pack, sharing food and blankets. Kalira watched him with admiration. His calm efficiency, combined with patience and understanding, made her realize how uniquely human qualities, intelligence, kindness, and determination, could inspire survival. As Lumo ate, Kalira took a moment to look at Ethan. "Why help us?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but earnest. "You do not know us. You do not need to do this." Ethan paused, considering. He smiled faintly. "Because anyone in danger deserves help," he said simply. "Because someone helped me once. And because it's the right thing to do." Kalira felt a warmth in her chest. It was a truth that transcended species, language, or culture. Humans, she realized, had a remarkable ability to act with compassion, even in difficult circumstances. They could choose to protect life, and sometimes that choice could change everything. Evening fell, painting the grove in shades of orange and purple. Kalira wrapped Lumo in a blanket and sat beside him, feeling the warmth of his small body. The wind rustled through the trees, and the distant mountains loomed like silent witnesses to their journey. Ethan built a small fire nearby, its light casting a gentle glow across the clearing. The warmth was comforting, but even more comforting was the presence of a friend, a protector, a human who had risked much to help them survive. Kalira realized that this was more than survival. It was connection. Trust had been built through actions, not words. Fear had been replaced with hope, and hope, she knew, was a powerful thing, stronger than hunger, colder than snow, and brighter than the harshest night. The next morning, Kalira and Lumo explored the grove under Ethan's watchful eye. Lumo discovered edible plants and small insects that were safe to eat. Kalira taught him how to identify safe foods, how to collect water, and how to move cautiously through the environment. Ethan showed them simple survival techniques, combining human ingenuity with Kalira's natural knowledge of her species. By afternoon, they had built a small, sturdy shelter using fallen branches and large leaves. It was simple but effective, providing protection from the wind and cold. Kalira felt a surge of pride. For the first time, she and Lumo were not merely surviving. They were learning to thrive in an alien environment, guided by cooperation and trust. As the days passed, the bond between the three strengthened. Lumo grew stronger and more curious, exploring the grove with Kalira and learning from Ethan. Kalira observed closely how humans interacted, how Ethan carefully balanced caution with encouragement. She realized that humanity had a remarkable ability to solve problems creatively, to think ahead, and to act with empathy, all qualities that had saved them from certain death. One afternoon, as they rested beside the stream, Lumo suddenly exclaimed, "Mother, I want to say thank you." Kalira smiled, nodding. "Yes, little one. We all have much to be thankful for." She turned to Ethan, who watched them quietly. Lumo extended his small hand toward the human, a gesture of friendship. Ethan knelt down, shaking it gently. The bond was complete, a connection that transcended species, built from trust, survival, and kindness. Kalira felt tears in her eyes. The mountains had been harsh, almost cruel, but they had also revealed something remarkable. Humans could inspire hope, courage, and resilience. They were strong, not just in body, but in heart and mind. Over the following days, Kalira and Ethan worked together to strengthen the shelter, gather supplies, and map out safe routes in the surrounding valley. Lumo helped where he could, learning from both his mother and the human who had become a part of their lives. Each task was a lesson, each moment a demonstration of cooperation. Kalira reflected on the journey, the crash, the cave, the struggle against hunger and cold, and the gradual trust that had grown between them. The mountains had tested every ounce of their strength, yet humanity's compassion and intelligence had carried them through. She realized that humans could achieve remarkable things when guided by empathy and purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, Kalira held Lumo close and watched Ethan at the stream. Water rippled gently over smooth stones as Ethan collected more for their shelter. Kalira felt a profound gratitude. The human had not only saved their lives, he had shown them the power of trust, intelligence, and kindness. "We are safe now," Kalira whispered to Lumo. "Because of him, and because we never gave up." Lumo nodded, his small face lit with a smile. "We survived," he said simply. Kalira looked at Ethan, who caught her gaze and nodded, a faint smile on his lips. No words were needed. They understood each other perfectly. Trust had been forged in danger, hope had been restored through kindness, and survival had been achieved through cooperation. As night fell, Kalira wrapped Lumo in a warm blanket and settled beside the small fire Ethan had built. The stars above shone brightly, unfamiliar constellations mingling with familiar ones from Kalira's home world. The mountains loomed in the distance, silent witnesses to their journey and their triumph. Kalira felt a sense of peace she had not known since the crash. They were not just alive. They were safe, cared for, and connected. The human had become more than a rescuer. He was a friend, a teacher, and a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, life could be preserved through courage, intelligence, and compassion. Over the next few days, Kalira and Lumo prepared for longer-term survival. They built more durable shelters, explored the valley for edible plants, and organized their resources. Ethan taught them how to identify safe routes, avoid dangers, and use natural tools to their advantage. Each day brought new lessons, and each lesson strengthened their bond. Kalira realized that humanity's greatest strength was not technology or weapons, but ingenuity and heart. Ethan's careful planning, patience, and empathy had saved their lives, and she marveled at the quiet heroism that humans often displayed without seeking recognition. Finally, as the sun rose over the mountains on a crisp morning, Kalira stood at the edge of the valley, Lumo beside her. The wind carried the scent of pine, snow, and fresh water. For the first time since the crash, she felt truly hopeful. They had survived the mountains, endured hunger and cold, and forged a connection that would carry them forward. Ethan approached, carrying supplies for the day. Kalira nodded in thanks, feeling the bond between them deepen further. This human had become a part of their lives, a symbol of hope, courage, and the extraordinary qualities of humanity. Kalira took a deep breath, holding Lumo's hand. "We are alive," she whispered. "We are safe, and we have hope." The mountains behind them were harsh, unforgiving, and dangerous, but the future stretched out ahead wide and open, filled with possibilities. Kalira knew that together, with courage, intelligence, and compassion, they could face whatever challenges awaited. As the three of them walked toward the shelter and the safety of the valley, Kalira allowed herself a smile. They had survived the impossible. They had been rescued not just by strength but by the remarkable qualities of a human who had shown that even across worlds, kindness and courage could triumph over fear and adversity.